Good morning, everyone. I noticed that we have a few students missing, but I understand the weather and it's 8:45 in the morning. But we'll just start off because we have 3 lectures to go today. So the first lecture this morning, and this is an absolute privilege to introduce Rohan D'Souza. Professor Rohan D'Souza is a distinguished environmental historian. He is currently a professor at the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies at Kyoto University, Japan. His career has been marked by a deep exploration of environmental issues with a particular emphasis in the Indian subcontinent. He is the author of Drowned and Damned, Colonial Capitalism and Flood Control in Eastern India. His edited books include The British Empire and the Natural World, Environmental Encounters in South Asia, and Environment, Technology and Development, Critical and Subversive Essays. He has held postdoctoral fellowships at Yale University and at University of California, Berkeley. He was also Senior Research Associate at the Center for World Environmental History at the University of Sussex, a visiting fellow at Resource Management Asia Pacific, Australian National University, and also a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. D'Souza's research is a testament to his dedication to unraveling the complex relationship between human societies and the natural world. In his works, he delves into the environmental history of South Asia, especially India, dissecting critical themes such as water resources, agriculture, land use, and the ecological changes that have shaped the subcontinent. His publications, including books, articles, and essays, offer critical insights into colonial and post-colonial environmental transformations in South Asia. Beyond his contributions to academic literature, D'Souza has made a lasting impact through his role as an educator and mentor. He is also a regular columnist in various news portals in India and newspapers. And apart from the usual stuff that I would read out about Rohan, I must tell you, as a person I know him for quite some time, he is one of those rare people in academia whose kindness precedes him. And a lot of young scholars like me have benefited immensely from his mentorship and his support for all these years. Rohan, it's a privilege to have you here. Friends, Rohan D'Souza.
Let me start by saying, Amit, thank you for that very generous introduction. And sometimes, if you get an introduction like that, you have no choice but to fail. I hope I won't. Let me just tell you that I'm deeply humbled and, somewhat overjoyed. When I wrote my first book in 2006 on water, I always believed that somehow I would come to Holland to speak. And I just had to wait 17 years for that. And, so you must forgive me if I am both slightly overjoyed and also humbled at the same time. Yeah? And thank you again for that invite. Now, very quickly, because I don't want to waste time, usually we start with a couple of jokes, but I'll get rid of that. If you look at the title, I almost seem to imply that this is something about historians not getting along with engineers. Yeah? And I'm sorry, I wrote it in a fashion just to be provocative, and I know that the audience will largely be engineers, and they would like to know why historians are being suggested to be smarter and not. At the end of my presentation, I hope you will realize that we need to work together, that history is a very important aspect of engineering, and the reverse, that engineering is an important aspect for historians as well. So let me get, do you need to shut lights, or is that okay? Can you see that? Would you like at least some, so that the, sorry? Yeah, because maybe the slides will not appear sharper. Oh. That's for the evening, but not, yeah. Okay, is that better? Much more sharper, yeah, okay. All right. Right, here's my, so I'll try and be quick, brief, and short, and perhaps helpful in what I'm going to say. All right, so the story starts in 1908. This is a picture of Tommaso Marinetti. He was a poet. And in 1908, he took a car and he drove really fast. And while he was driving fast, he came across 2 cyclists. And in order to save them, he had to swerve and he fell into a ditch. and he had he came out completely unscathed. But a very strange thing happened after that accident. Marinetti decided that he was very, very enthralled by the idea of speed, by the muscularity of being modern. And he completely began to change radically. And in 1909, the next year, he wrote a futurist manifesto that first got published in Le Figaro, in which he said something of this nature. He said, "What is the point of learning about the past, which is over and mostly forgotten and is so just dead? History has only the past and no future." So Marinetti, as a futurist, tried to make the case that we need to forget history, we need to forget the past, and he worked very much to say that get rid of museums, get rid of libraries. I know among some students that's not a bad idea, and really focus on trains, planes, factories, everything that was modern. And he wanted any sense of the past to not be left as a residue in the modern city. Yeah? So if there's anyone who thought that history did not matter and was not needed, I would say it would be Marinetti. And he started the futurist movement. Lots of young people, they loved the energy, some of them loved the violence, some of them wanted huge buildings as a testament to a new kind of modernity. And this is the painting that perhaps you saw in my first slide. It's called The City Rises by Umberto Boccioni. And I think the painting was 1911. And this is of a wild horse, a red wild horse, and people trying to get some sort of control of the horse. And Boccioni drew this as a way to celebrate the fact that Milan, the city of Milan, had just got an electric powerhouse. And he wanted this painting to capture that moment of wild energy and people trying to control it and, of course, ride the horse, so to speak. Yeah? Now, of course, for the futurists, the engineer is a very important aspect of that imagination and thinking. They build things. They make the modern possible. Yeah? And there is a question, of course, that emerges that does the engineer just make things, just do things, or does the engineer also have a philosophy? And for here, I want to take a slight detour into someone called Peter Lipton. Offers a very good definition of what it is to be an engineer. And Lipton, he's no more, but he was in the History and Philosophy of Science department at Cambridge. And he writes that engineering is about building artifacts by possessing the know-how, the skill to do so, but without, and this is very important, but without always having the ability to choose the problem. So Lipton is basically suggesting engineers solve problems, but they don't ask the question, what is the problem? Okay? That's set by industrialists, politicians, governments. So other people give you a problem and you solve it, but you don't really get around to questioning the problem. Yeah? This is now a very important way of defining the engineer. Yeah? That he is not, he's a problem solver. He doesn't question the problem. Yeah? I don't know if many of you might share this idea, but in the large scheme of things, what we could say is that engineers are problem solvers for whom science is a tool. The definition of science is the study of nature, but here engineers turn science into a tool so that they can put nature to work. So you build a dam, you build a windmill, yeah? You put nature to work, not necessarily other human beings, yeah? And this is now a broad way that I understand engineering. They're problem solvers, they put nature to work, and for them, science is not necessarily a mode of inquiry, but science becomes a tool by which you control, dominate, and put nature to work. Now, this is very different from the historian. I'm sorry if there are historians in this room other than myself. These are not very inspiring pictures. I did history in school, and like most people, I found it tremendously boring. It was about dates, kings, wars, and just memory. Yeah, and it did put a lot of people to sleep. But it's only when I went to the university that I began to understand that actually history is much more complicated. The past is something that needs a real philosophical sensibility. Yeah, and so I'm just going to run through a few philosophers of history, just to underline the fact that it is that going to the past, walking to the past, is not a very simple sense, simple technique. It requires a lot of philosophical reflection. So I want to talk a little bit about somebody called R.G. Collingwood, who's also a philosopher of history. And he made something very clear. He said, history, the past does not exist. It's no longer there. So how do you study it? Yeah? And he made a good point. He said, you cannot observe it. And whatever is there of the past, you can only understand by what the traces are in the present. Right? It's like a detective. There are artifacts, there are ideas, there are hints of what the past would look like. Yeah. So given that, he offers this theory called the past is reenactment. That is, you have to get under the skin and into the head of the person of the past. So the past for Collingwood can only be understood as a thought, as an idea, not as an artifact. Please remember, the engineer builds things, but the historian gets under the skin and into the thought process of the past by understanding reason, reading documents, pamphlets, etc., books. So you can only create the past from the present, and that's another, create the past from the present. That's fairly dense, but I wanted to underline that you cannot observe the past. It's not an artifact. You have to understand it as a dialogue with ideas. But one of the most working explanations of history, and many of us even continue to refer to E.H. Carr today, a very famous book, What is History, 1961. Amongst the books that I would keep on my shelf, I would probably get What is History by H. Carr. Very accessible, very readable. It's lost none of its energy and strength, despite the fact it was published in 1961. And H. Carr writes, the function of the historian is neither to love the past, nor to emancipate himself from the past, but to master and understand it as the key to the understanding of the present. So it's very clear that the past is about understanding the present, all right? Not just for the terms of the past, because he doesn't want us to fall in love with the past. And he offers a fairly practical and helpful way about thinking about the past. He says, my first answer, therefore, to the question, what is history, is that it is a continuous process of interaction between the historian and his facts, an unending dialogue between the present and the past. That is, the past is never there. It's always part of an unending dialogue between the present and the past. All right? Okay? If someone treats the past as something frozen, as something that doesn't move, that is eternal, always there forever. So sometimes when we say tradition, you might treat it as something frozen in time, when actually it is, for E.H. Carr and for many historians, a basis for a dialogue between the present and the past. So E.H. Carr often talks about the need to continuously understand a turning between facts and interpretation. That there is no fact that just stands. And the interpretation basically helps you find your facts, and your facts then shape your interpretation and so on. So it's much more circular. So E.H. Carr would be something like this. There's evidence, there's facts and interpretation, and they're constantly turning and shaping each other. Okay? Now, why am I saying this? Because I want to say something to show how the historian is completely opposite to that of the engineer. We have many traditions in history writing. I won't walk you through them. There are postmodernists, post-structuralists, cultural history, environment history, etc., but just abandon that for the moment. I want to underline that historians actually do two things at the research level. One is they establish the provenance of the sources. We don't say historians use data. We often say historians refer to their sources, because the source is at once a fact and also a interpretation, both. And the sources, like, why would I read my grandmother's diary to understand Einstein? I have to establish that. If let's say my grandmother did not know to write, which was the case, and that she didn't understand Einstein. So why would her diary make any sense for me to understand Einstein? So a historian has to establish the validity of the evidence. Whatever evidence you bring to bear of your sources, you have to prove that it's relevant to the claims you're making. Yeah? So it's not an easy task. And then secondly, the most important thing is a historian must help us understand how we separate the past from the present. So, for example, if I say, I want to understand Napoleon Bonaparte by looking at all his contacts on his cell phone. Anyone will tell you that probably is not going to happen, because there were no cell phones in the 18th century, right? And this is just a crude example to tell you that you cannot treat the past as really something of the present. It must have its own terms of reference. So in Napoleon's time, it is quite probable that diaries, letters, books, might reveal much more than the search for his cell phone. Yeah. So we have to constantly separate the past and the present. That's what historians do. Okay. So at the end of it, historians are problem constitutors. We really try and explain why the problem we have is a good problem from a bad problem. So remember, engineers don't question problems. We actually, historians, go out of our way to establish what is a good problem to have. So if you are doing your PhD in history, then your examiner wants to know whether this is a relevant problem. That if you say, my history, I want to know how many people had long noses in ancient Rome. Yeah? And, if you know a bit about Roman history, the Romans preferred generals for long noses. For some strange reason, we don't know. That people with long noses had good ability to command. All right? But that's what I want to get across, is that we always try and establish what is a good problem to have, rather than solve problems. Yeah? And I often tell my students in class that if you ever solve a problem, charge them a lot of money, because that's not your job. Yeah? So let me now break this down into two neat divisions. Engineers are problem solvers. Historians are problem constitutors. For engineers, science is a tool. Okay? Science is a tool, not a mode of inquiry. And for historians, constant tensions between interpretation and fact. All right? That dialogue is something that we understand. So if we know this basic difference, let's look at how engineers have dealt with the issue of floods and how historians have dealt with the issue of floods. It's very interesting that how we actually approach a natural event from two radically different standpoints. So for most engineers, not all, this is at least 19th century, floods are a disaster event. You want to prevent them from happening. And so many engineers had certain solutions like flood control, build dams, build embankments, theories of flood management, yeah, right? And so that fundamentally what an engineer does, he says, don't let the river overspill its banks, and how to prevent that from happening. And at the heart of this is good ideas of prediction and good ideas of control because of prediction. Yeah? So that's how many engineers have, at least in South Asia, continue to be schooled, and much of Europe till a very long time. But I believe that has changed a great deal. Now, here's the bad news. There are a lot of historians who have also published on floods and on rivers and waters. But they don't see it that way. They don't see floods really necessarily as a calamitous event. They want to get to the point where they want to ask, for whom is it a disaster? Who decided it was a disaster? And is it really a disaster? So that's the standpoint. That's the way we've a problem constituting exercise. And you must forgive me, very modestly, I'm going to discuss my book in 30, 40 odd seconds. It's a very painful book to read. I wrote it at a time when I probably didn't know how to write well. And so if I work you through this, you don't ever have to read it. And if it's of some use to you, you might be able to use it. So in 2006, my book came out, but it was actually part of my PhD. And when I was doing my PhD, I really wanted, there's a very famous dam in eastern India called the Hirakud Dam. And I thought I was going to write a story about how for centuries people were being devastated by floods, suffered immensely, property losses, loss of lives. And you can see how celebrated this dam is. After India's independence in 47, it was one of the first major large dams. You have a rupee note, that is the currency in India, which has the picture of the dam. You have a stamp. Of course, now the stamp is, I don't know if I show it to kids now, they won't understand what a stamp is because it's all on email and WhatsApp. But that was a huge display of an emerging post-colonial nation and its triumph with modernity. You control rivers through these large structures, and you become a stronger nation by that. So I thought, the plot would be simple, that there's immense suffering, and then after some time, the dam comes and solves everything. And when I began my field work, which is archival and visiting Orissa, I stumbled onto something completely odd. And this is perhaps what historians do. I found there were lots of documents telling us that Eastern India, and I think you can see the map that's on the east, yeah? Eastern India was a flood-dependent agrarian regime. So I'd come across these documents where peasants are fighting for floods. They're breaking down embankments. They're cutting holes into the canal system. They're fighting. They're going to jail. And that's rather odd. I mean, here's the engineers of science, people who have, mathematically concluded what the problems are with the rivers. And they build all these embankments and structures, and peasants, mostly illiterate, are fighting for floods. And so my story then became something like this. Eastern India was a flood-dependent agrarian regime. And by the mid-19th century, it becomes a flood-vulnerable landscape. How did that transformation, how did that transition happen? So I studied it for about 100, 150 years. And I ended up making a claim in which I said that with the coming of the British in Eastern India in 1803, a certain notion of land as exclusive private property was put forward for the first time, historically unprecedented in that region. And in order for land to be profitable for paying rent and revenue, the British worked very hard in separating land and rivers. So if you can see the pictures, I mean, you have rivers that are completely chaotic, especially at the delta level, shifting, and they wanted to be something like this, contained within a channel. And there was a desperate fight to keep rivers disciplined, domesticated, and in a straight line. Yeah. So in many ways, what I ended up arguing is that, which I said at the end, that the flood control through the Hirakud Dam is a monument of forgetting a longer history of flood utilization. So are you getting, this is a problem constituting exercise, that floods were not an unequivocal bad that historically was always a catastrophe, that there were deeper traditions of flood utilization. And so the large dam was a monument to forget a history of flood utilization. Yeah? So this is how historians tend to think differently, which is not to suggest that at the end of this you are going to take a hammer and break the dam. I'm simply saying that the dam fits in a very different history than a history of triumph and control and prediction. Yeah? Which now brings me to my main claim. So in India, we've had three very, very interesting engineers. Okay, I don't know if some of you might be familiar with the Indian Institute of Technology, the IITs. India's best are produced from that. And three engineers, all men, A.K. Dunu Roy, Dinesh Mishra, and somebody called Jayant Bandyopadhyay. all of them actually trained in IITs and came out completely challenging and questioning the engineering mood and vision and consensus in India. And all three of them have argued in different writings, and much before my book as well, that rivers are actually not simply large volumes of water that are moving, but they are active geomorphologic processes. That through erosion and deposition, rivers build up land and create ecosystems, and that historically in South Asia, and this is very important, people have adapted to floods by tapping riverine silt and mud for cultivation and by exploiting the fish habitats. So their argument is that it's not a history of control, it's a history of adaptation. All right, and that is the claim they make. I would argue, though, of course, having read all of them and knowing them personally, that some of their claims are hunches and speculation, but because they are not historians, they don't really do too much archival work, and their treatment of sources is very different. But the larger picture agrees with them about how people, and they're probably because they talk to farmers and cultivators on the ground. So what we get in India is two very different ways of thinking about floods. There's the infrastructure-centric flood control approach, which says that engineering is key, predict, control, and manage floods. And then you have those who argue floods as process, histories of utilization and strategies for adaptation. So both of them end up with two very different ways of looking at a river. So Danish, who will be speaking after me, this is how a drawing looks of the Indus River system. Clean lines, it's like almost like a circuit board. Yeah, that's how a cubic plus kilowatt river looks. And then there is a river that is a fluvial process, chaotic, no lines, always full of the possibility of changing its channel and shifting around. So in some ways, we can put the contrast as between a reptile and that of an amphibian. So for the reptile, it is a river of quantities, volumes, which you can stock in a reservoir. So you hold it back in a reservoir and let it use it whenever you want. While in a river of qualities, it is about a collection of different kinds of flood pulses, the play of silt and mud that links different kinds of fish habitats. Yeah? So you can see that the flood event can be read very differently and starkly between historians and a certain kind of, I would say, masculine engineering tradition. Yeah? So all that is fine. While the debate was happening, something extraordinary happened as well. And this is what we all worry about today. The Anthropocene flood in South Asia has arrived. There's no doubt about it. And I'm just going to flag a few instances, such as in the city of Mumbai. In 2005, something like 944 millimeters were dumped. That is about 25.35 inches was received within the 12-hour period between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And this is the photograph of that time. And you can see there is no difference between river and land in this particular context. What is sticking out are people and trucks. And so this was a complete shock event, unprecedented. There's lots of analysis. Was it bad drainage? Are we managing lands badly? And so on and so forth. Here's another picture to just... So, if you look at these pictures, it looks like people are the embankment, so to speak. Now, in 2010, which I'm sure Danish will speak in more detail, 2010 in Pakistan, the floods directly affected about 20 million people, mostly by destruction of property, livelihood, and infrastructure, with a death toll of close to 2,000. Yeah? It was an immense jaw-breaking moment. In the city of Chennai in 2015, I mean, you can just remember the names. You don't need to know the location. We had a similar unprecedented calamitous flood. And according to SkyMed data, during the month of November, Chennai recorded a whopping 1,218.6 mm of rain, 3 times its monthly rainfall. The normal rainfall figures for November stood at 4. I mean, it's 3 times what it normally gets, and it happened, in a month. Yeah. Now, what is the biggest fear? The biggest fear is losing the ability to predict. If you remember in one of my first slides, central to engineering is the ability to predict. Without prediction, can you have control? Yeah. And one of the challenges that the Anthropocene poses for us is a loss of prediction. Yeah. And with that loss of prediction, all our methodologies, techniques, categories, concepts, they begin to wobble. They begin to get upended. Yeah. Now, of course, all is not lost. There is complexity science. Many people are arguing that should we think beyond control and prediction, and should we embrace complexity? And now this is the most important part, where problem constituting exercises and problem solving should be in a dialogue. All right? Okay? This is something that's now being suggested, that historians and engineers need not sit in different rooms and listen to different kinds of ways of thinking about the world. They should be in the same room together, and they should be looking at ways in which problem constituting and problem solving are in conversation. And this is now something that's beginning to catch on. That maybe, just maybe, there should be now an emphasis on thinking about locality, on the ground, looking at specificities rather than, why do I say locality and specificities? Historians are good at this. Historians are really looking for the unique. They are really looking for change and the unique, while engineers look for universal principles. Yeah. So, there's a contrast here when you say locality and specificity. And then historians, they don't mind contingency and surprise. Yeah. So just as I went out to do my field work thinking I should celebrate a large dam and finding out the complete reverse. Yeah. That it was a history of flood utilization. And so historians are also good at understanding aspects of uncertainty. Yeah. So we don't look for a world that gives you patterns that are universal. We look for surprise, contingency, uncertainty, and so on and so forth. So some of the arguments that are now emerging are suggesting that we decenter the engineer, which is not to say we get rid of the engineer. It's just the engineer is going to be along a round table talking to sociologists, historians, economists, biologists, whole slew of people as we come together to solve our challenges for the Anthropocene. Okay? So don't get me wrong, I'm not asking engineers to be out of the classroom or out of the conversation. I'm simply saying decenter the engineer and engage with plural methodologies for a non-linear world. Non-linear, I'm assuming you understand that cause and effect is not so straightforward. Yeah. Let me now just go back very quickly to some of the lessons from the futurists. Even Boccioni, who drew that The City Rises, he was so enthused by speed and violence and modernity that he joined the army and he was shot dead, yeah, and he died. And much of the writings on futurism, by the way, has become history. It's a subject of history. So they never defied what they were going out to dismiss. So in the founding manifesto published in Le Figaro on 20th February 1909, Marinetti writes, "Up to now, literature has exalted a pensive immobility, ecstasy, and sleep. We intend to exalt aggressive action, a feverish insomnia, the racer's stride, the mortal leap, the punch, and the slap." That's what he was interested in. Violence was their preferred mode of interacting with reality and the path to creation of the new man. Right? And of course, Marinetti joined Mussolini, and we all know how that ended up. Yeah. So, will a future without a past give us fascism? That is a big question, right? So someone like me would argue that history is very important, not merely as a lesson, but really important for how we understand our present. Yeah, and so climate change is now throwing up new challenges: the loss of predictability, loss of control, the need for understanding locality, specificity, contingency, uncertainty. Yeah, and so would a conversation between historians and engineers be the way forward? Yeah, and thank you so much for this. Within 40 minutes. All right.
Thank you, Rohan, for a wonderful talk. And we can open up the floor for anyone who has questions for Rohan. And we can have another 15-20 minutes of discussion. So, any questions?
Hello, I'm Hussain from Bangladesh. I have a question. In a slide, you have shown a fluvial river. I saw a thing that Q-sec plus Q-watt equals to river. Actually, I didn't get it what it means.
What river?
Q-sec plus
megawatt river. Oh, yeah.
Is it Q-sec defines flood and kilowatt defines power generation? That is kind of a river things. Actually, I am to be clear about these things.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Can I answer now? Yeah?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, Q6 plus kilowatt river is that Q6 is for irrigation, yeah? And kilowatt is, of course, hydroelectricity. So a large thinking of the 19th century in South Asia was when you asked the river, the engineer, what is a river? They said a river is basically a channel that carries volumes of water which is used for irrigation. So they didn't understand it as a fish habitat. So QSEC often says, oh, the river is basically water for irrigation, nothing else. Yeah. So a volume became something that was not an act of life for the fish, but it was merely an input into agriculture. Okay. So it is a limited understanding of the river. And then you got megawatts, kilowatts, which is engineering, and then you need to build a dam. And that affects fish populations as well. So in one way, the river became Q6 plus kilowatt. And thank you for the question. I'm sorry, I should have elaborated it. But I wanted to actually tell you is that if it's a Q6 kilowatt river, it looks something like this, like straight lines, like a circuit board. Yeah. But reality for, say, someone who understands as a fluvial process, it is more cognizant of the river's moods, erratic, what we could consider erratic behavior, or its temperaments. Yeah. So very different ways of imagining a river. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Rohan, for a wonderful presentation. I am Sudhi from India. So, regarding this flood in Hirakud, there was incidences in 1930 and 1982.
Yeah.
And there was an incidence of flood in Brahmini, if I am correct, and in Mahanadi also.
Yeah.
And at that moment, the urban landscape was different, the population was different, the urbanization was different, everything is different.
Yeah.
So, if I have to compare the historical perspective in the term of engineering, the significance of making dams like Hirakud Dam, is it right to compare both scenario?
Okay. Can I put that question slightly differently? And if it's so different from what you've asked, then please stop me. Yeah. So the question is, times have changed. Can you simply go back? If someone comes like me, no, listen, this is a history of utilization. The loss of the history of utilization is also loss of an entire ability to tap floods. That is, the small guy who used to do it maybe no longer exists. Yeah. Plus, in Orissa today, because of embankments and the large dam, the levels within the country now are radically different. Okay, so this is not some, you don't say, it would be very, I used to say this before I got wrapped on the knuckles and I realized I was talking something, very impossible request, demand or whatever, is that, to know the past is to add it to how we shape possibilities. Now that we know that floods have not been intrinsically calamitous events and that there are different histories of utilizing it, perhaps our engineering and our histories now can forge different possibilities for the future. So even if you look at Holland, I'm slightly familiar with some of the construction works. They are now talking to ecologists, they're talking to biologists before they build something. Yeah, and they know that simply preventing floods from happening is not the end of the story, but a beginning of a different level of problems. Yeah, so in India, unfortunately, and much of South Asia, I should say, and Danish will bear me on that, is that we are still, our engineering is still stuck in the 19th century. So it's nice lobbies of contractors, engineers, infrastructure developers, yeah, and a political cycle which is short term. Yeah, so if you combine all of that together, who's going to listen to a historian? Yeah, so my submission is that if engineers took to history and historians also understood the world of engineering, then we could probably be part of a very active dialogue. The thing that can be said right now for South Asia, I mean very confidently, and I can say this with some degree of certainty that I'm not all wrong, is that business as usual is not working. And what we have done in the past, as in the 19th century, and given what challenges we have, this causes us now to rethink. And in order to rethink, we need to talk to more different kinds of methodologies and voices and understandings. Yeah, that's the claim being made here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Morning, I'm Kuria. Thank you for the interesting lecture. I wanted to ask, once engineers start having this historical perspective and trying to understand there's a process behind this, does that change the solutions we currently have, or is it about maybe the same solution but different?
Okay. So let me see if I've understood that question in a slide. I'm going to push you in a certain direction. How did the engineers come to arrive at an understanding that rivers are basically just volumes of water that need to be irrigated? Yeah, if I'm to understand your question, yeah, that's one aspect. Actually, that's part of my book and part of several articles I've written. The engineers that were brought into India were not in control of the problem or the questions. So the revenue department, which wanted to make lots of money from the land tax, they basically told these guys, stop the water from overflowing. And then they got around to basically building embankments and large dams. And interestingly enough, by the mid-19th century, in Orissa, the place I studied, it's the engineers who were saying, this is actually a very bad attitude to be stopping flooding. So some of the most impressive critiques of embankment construction and flood control is actually coming from engineers, not necessarily from historians, where there were not many in that period. Yeah, right. So to your question, how did they arrive at this? As I said, they had no control over the problem. Yeah, but once they do get a sense of the problem, like the engineers, Dunu Roy and the others I pointed you, then they advocate a very different style of intervention. Yeah, right? Yeah. Oh.
Is it the same existing solutions, but better, or is it a completely new solution?
Okay, good point. I'm not the most competent to answer that, but I can say this much, that from reading Dunu Roy and Jayanta Bandyopadhyay and Dinesh Mishra, all very charismatic people, by the way, who can keep audiences in complete thrall for hours on end. They seem to be suggesting that simply building our way out of a crisis is not working, and that we have to learn how to figure out ways of flood utilization and how to recognize the different capacities of a river. Yeah, right? And so there are some arguments that they make for that. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Really big thank you for your inspirational presentation. And the thing that came to my mind, what I got from your presentation,
Yeah.
Was that there were used to be some kind of ways that we used to deal with the problems in the past that we've kind of forgotten, by just trying to control everything and to use and utilize everything, every resource we have.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we've been able to thrive and build a modern society. And the solution to our problems may be looking at the history to see what we used to do in the past and try to apply it to the present problems that we have.
Right.
But throughout history, we've never been in a situation like this that there have never been 8.5 billion people around the world.
Right. Right.
So if we apply the idea of just floods are just natural processes, which they are.
Yeah.
Beware, they are, and they will be.
Yeah.
In the modern world, that would cause a disaster, for example, in Mumbai.
Right.
If there wasn't a dam there may be more catastrophe and more calamity and more life loss. So how do you approach that kind of problem with a kind of a perspective of the historical part of it?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a very good question. Thank you. And you're not a historian, are you? But you do very well in a history class. That is perfect. A great question. Okay, I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I'm celebrating the past or that we should go back. I don't mean to. I'm not an advocate for that. If anything, I'm very critical of a simplified understanding of our past and tradition. Yeah, okay? I'm very much a modernist in every sense of the word. What I would argue is a more reflexive modernity, a modernity that is informed by the past, but not something that is looking backwards and trying to go back to the past. Yeah. Why do I say that? Is that business as usual is not working. Flooding is being aggravated because of a fundamentally limited understanding of what rivers are. Okay. Now, in Mumbai, there's this lovely work of someone called Dilip Dakuna, and he has got this notion of what is called, and he's a designer. He's a what is it? He's a designer and an architect, and I recently just gave another lecture on his writings called Soak. So there is an entire slow water movement. There's lots of writings on it. It's called Slow Water. If you Google it, there's a lovely recent book by somebody called Erica Guys. The title was really bad. It says "Water Always Wins." I don't know, but the book was fabulous. Yeah, but I didn't quite like the title, and I reviewed it. So she talks about the slow water movement. Now, that in climate change, the Anthropocene kind of imagination, rather than getting rid of water quickly, we have to think of ways of slowing it down. So cities must have wetland ecologies around them. And in China, you have somebody called, and I'll pronounce this very wrong, Yu Kongyan. Yeah, he's got this notion of what is called sponge city. And about 200 projects are being played out in different parts of China on the sponge city idea. That is, you build all these wetland ecosystems, they soak up the water and hold it so that you're not smashed at one go. Yeah, and what is happening in big cities is that it's a real estate logic. It's not an ecological logic. So they're building a lot of they're building a lot of stuff on drainage lines, on riverbeds, and they're colonizing parts of the city which should actually exist as a waterway, right? So there's many ways of thinking about this, challenge. But I completely agree with you. Very dangerous to just go back to the past, and like Collingwood, the past is over. It's not there, Whatever exists of it is in the minds of the people of the past, So it is the idea that lives, not the physical, tangible aspect of the past, So let me just end by saying, unlike the futurists who wanted a disconnect, a rupture, a dismissal, I would argue that we need to build bridges and dialogues and understand those continuities as we shape possibilities for the future. Right. So thank you very much for the question. It's the last thing I want to do, and sometimes I often make this mistake of trying to come across as someone who wants to celebrate the past. I don't. If anything, I'm extremely critical of a lot that happens. Very critical of that kind of attitude. Right? It's the future we've got to shape. Right. Oh.
Thank you, Rohan. I really enjoyed the presentation. I would like to ask you more a practical problem, and just want to know what is the way that we can approach that problem. So in Mexico we have a city that is very industrialized,
right,
that requires a lot of water and depends on groundwater.
Right.
So right now the problem is that the city just run out of water.
Right.
And the way they are solving, and this happened last year, is by bringing water from outside. Just an engineering way to solve the problem. But that is causing more problems in the adjacent cities that are remaining. So in this particular case, how can we make use of this kind of reframing the problem?
Right. There's a great book on this called, I forget the title, but about historically, Mexico City was, how do you pronounce it? Tenochtitlan? Tenochtitlan, It was actually when was it Cortez or was it Pizarro? It was Cortez. Cortez. When Cortez turns up, he's shocked because it's a city of lakes and water, and with his horses, it's not a very good situation for him. And he does write about the fact that this is a city in the middle of a kind of a collection of islands, and that's how Mexico was what is today Mexico City. And then for over 200 years, they've been drying up that city. Right, they've been evacuating it of its water, evacuating it of its ponds and its marshes and so on and so forth, because there's the modern man is a reptile. He's more comfortable with his eggs in land than as he uses the water. So there is an aspect about rethinking the imagination of the city from being simply a city that addresses real estate, and a city that begins to think ecologically. So there is now a lot of writings that argue that our best bet is to turn the cities into these ecological imaginations, more parks, more water bodies, more wildlife, different kinds of strategies to store water, absorb water, and live with all kinds of technologies that clean up our mess. And the simple old ways of taking the garbage and throwing it out is not going to work, right? So recycling and all kinds of technologies in which cities become ecologically as self-sufficient as possible. Okay. Someone like me would argue that we need more public goods. A public good is a good that is built for without keeping in mind profit. You use people's taxes to make it accessible to all, like parks, forests, good clean air. And to answer your question in this long-winded way, that I don't have a specific answer to that, But there is already a lot of writings about how new cities for the 21st century should be imagined. Because as we now realize that much of rural areas in the world are evacuating. Like Japan, for example, where I live, 96% are urban population, 4% are rural. Yeah, Britain, I think, also is some 4%. The US also 4% rural. Yeah, majority of people live in the cities. So the cities need to be able to clean themselves up, rather than turn the surrounding hinterland into dumping grounds. Yeah, in Mexico, this becomes severe because your rural-urban divide is still not as large as the US or UK. But then interesting things are also happening. In UK, a large amount of land that historically belonged to rural areas, they are now rewilding them. They are turning them into wildlife parks. They're introducing animals. Yeah, and they are basically playing with ideas about what nature was in the 16th century or 12th century. So what we have is actually a time in history where we are not going to be working with older conceptions of what is a city and what is a village. We can actually rethink those imaginations. Yeah, and key to that is how to build public goods in cities, not private services, but public goods. Yeah, I don't know if that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. So I just wanted to find out, okay, sort of give a bit of background.
Yeah.
If you're a civil engineer, when you probably jump in, and when it comes to history, the only thing you deal with is historical data. When it comes to rainfall, that's in terms of history. Maybe ask some people where was the flood, how high did it go,
Yeah.
and that's as far as it goes when you consider history.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, your lecture's been very interesting and has made me want to think a lot about tools and techniques and how do you then actually incorporate history and
Yeah,
understanding history.
Yeah.
And sort of using history as a tool
Right.
in your engineering solution. And
Yeah.
do you have any sources or ways to go about that to change traditional engineering
Right.
method or something that would maybe
Yeah.
start to move around this? Because I mean, coming from South Africa, all I knew was
Yeah.
the linear path.
Yeah, right.
Put everything in pipes, you move to Netherlands.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's like nature-based solutions, the sponge cities, you don't
Yeah.
know about this.
Yeah.
And it's taken me some time to truly understand and grasp this concept, but
Right.
that I also had guidance and tools, so would you be able to provide the same?
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. So can I just repeat your question? Right. So what you're saying is that there's been a very simple sense of the past for many engineers that you look at rivers, what is the maximum height at which it rises, and then you prepare your infrastructure models accordingly. Yeah. But as you realize, history is more complicated than that. And precisely because it's complicated, because anything can be a source, you have to establish what is a source. Okay, so in my case, I thought I'm just going to listen to engineers, and what they wrote about embankments. But then I found documents where there was a list of complaints by peasants. They were. I'll get to that later. But how those peasants actually wrote down that they wanted the floods, and I was completely. I had no way of understanding why this was being written. I was completely lost for words, and so then I had to establish. So it was a group of peasants, and then who agitated, so from police records one found out this agitation, and one found out what the complaints were, not from the engineering world. Yeah. So your sources will come from many places. It is how you are attentive to what is a source and what can be treated as a reliable source. Yeah. So it's not just there, right? So I learned a lot from police records about the Hirakud Dam rather than from engineering records as well. Yeah, and a lot of civic action taken by which also sometimes it's very important to know this, that no protest is ever in vain, even if it's lost. Leave a mark there. Somebody will find it out maybe 100 years from now, and it will change the story. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I'm sure when they protested, there were these petitions. I'm sure they thought they were, they were going to protest. It was not going to amount to much, but they're going to do it anyway. And sure enough, 100 years, 150 years later, somebody discovers them and changes the story on Hirakud. Yeah. So it's very important for a historian to establish what we call the provenance of our source. Why this is a good source? Why is it a credible source? Yeah. Right. So it's like if I say I've listened to my 5-year-old daughter and she says she didn't eat the chocolates. I have to figure out, whether this is a credible way of saying yes or no. Yeah, right? So you have to interrogate your sources and establish them all the time. And that's a good training by a historian. Yeah, right? Okay. Sorry, I hope that...
We've lost a lot of indigenous knowledge, so how do we go about
there are lots of oral history. There's a lot of work on oral history, how to listen. How to listen and how to think this through. Yeah, it's not lost. Don't worry. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm a social scientist, historian by training.
Yeah.
And one thing that I struggle with is convincing real estate owners to allocate land for public goods like parks, like wetlands.
Yeah.
How do you convince them to do that when they know they're not going to get a financially measurable profit out of it? Obviously we can say, well, it'll help with cooling the natural area, but they're like, yeah, but I still don't get money out of it. How do you go about convincing these people when their minds are so focused on the financial profits alone?
Right. Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Lots of us struggle with it, yeah. There's policy and there's politics, okay? A definition of policy, a useful definition for me, and I've used it in many places, is policy is the art of humiliating politics through good science. Yeah, okay? Policy is the art, it's not science. Policy is the art of humiliating politics through good science. Yeah, so you've got to constantly work what is good science and what is not. So civic action is an important criterion. Democracy is a very important ingredient in this, yeah? And the ability not to give up. We do know that if people pay less for clean air, clean water, they can be more productive. They can be less stressed. They can make cities more livable, more habitable. Yeah, and those struggles are happening all over the world. Yeah, and then we are citizens. I would add the word immigrant at some level as well. Citizens are it's our duty to pursue rights and to insist on changes which are good for the community as such. Yeah, so we shouldn't give up on that, right? Why policy and politics is because politics is, the realm of interest and power, and policy is a way in which you can speak to it through good science. Yeah, and so we should not give up that quest. And I don't think, there is increasingly a realization that poor quality air, lack of good infrastructure, poor water, it really creates a bad mood and sets up a city in a very wrong way. Yeah? So these are good demands and they should be pursued. Yeah, I mean that's the best I can do. Yeah. Oh, Danish. Yeah. Yeah.
Eminent domain.
Okay.
Countries use eminent domain all the time to possess poor people's land for real estate development, for whatever purposes, and give them typically 1 to 10% of what the actual price of the land might be.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about real estate developers and everything, might want to reconsider eminent domain, which is routinely used against poor people, but almost never against rich people.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Yeah. In other words, there are many aspects of a strategy that would be local, specific, tactical, yeah, and keeping in mind non-violent ways of pursuing your goals, yeah, and democratic ways of pursuing your goals. Yeah.
earlier that yes, not business as usual, and there is a catchphrase on like a climate change scenario. In the context of now lacking predictability, do you think that is just another catchphrase that probably as scientists and policymakers are using? Like, do you think that we have a climate change scenario that we can actually use with the models and everything?
Yeah. Oh, very good question. You know, that's why all of us in this room, education is so critical. Yeah. You know, in a crisis situation, there is a strong. There should be a strong. One should be very careful to make sure that certain interests don't manipulate a crisis in their favor. You know, you often hear the word "never lose a good." You know, you should never lose a good crisis, because you can shift it in the direction, and that is why I would argue that democracy and democratic thinking, listening to a large number of voices, is very critical. I do understand. All of us are aware today that under the broad rubric of climate change, there is a lot of stuff that's happening that actually goes against people, the poor, the underprivileged, the impoverished. Yeah, it doesn't work in their favor. In fact, alarm is often used to ram through policies without proper consideration for the people who are going to benefit. Yeah, so I completely agree with you that one has to approach all of this talk with a degree of suspicion and a degree of questioning, yeah, and caution as well. Yeah, don't take for granted that just because somebody says climate change is happening, we've got to do something about it, and business as usual doesn't work. It doesn't mean that they are on the side of the people who really need it the most. Yeah, right. So often, for example, in India, and I'm sorry, very quickly, I'll just take a few minutes. Often in India, climate change. They always talk about adaptation, yeah, but you'll see adaptation is always directed at the poor, the already disempowered. So they want all kinds of solar powered lights for the poor, or etc., whatever projects. But nobody asks the guys who are guzzling ACs 24 hours to pipe down. Nobody tells them, okay, no more cars, yeah, because those guys are being told consume as much as you can because that's good for the market, right? But you find n number of technologies and techniques that are going down to people who actually don't produce too much of a carbon footprint. Yeah, right. So that is, I agree. It's a complete. That's why. Problem constituting is as important as problem solving. Yeah. Oh.
So,
Okay.
I have a question about the recent incidents of flood in Pakistan.
Yeah.
This Indus River, there is history of flood in Indus River, and there are evidences, archaeological and historical evidences, that Indus Valley civilization was badly affected by the flooding and climate change.
Yeah.
So, as a historian, what could you suggest that what scientists and engineers should take into consideration for formulating a sustainable solution for flooding in these areas?
Okay, that's a very big question. Anyway, Danish is here, so I won't even dare answer it. But for all of you who are here in general, I know many of you are not completely aware of the debates in India on history and South Asia actually. So there is one mystery that haunts all of South Asia historians and history writing. So this is a place called Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. It's now in Pakistan. Yeah. So around 2500 BC, there was this flourishing urban society, civilization, drainages, large tanks, huge buildings, very modern planning actually, stunning. And then it suddenly disappeared. nobody knows why and how. We have many theories: climate change, water. Some people argue that maybe attacks from outside and so on and so forth. But we don't know. No historian. We have some broad theories, but we don't know. Yeah, okay. But it is a mystery, and like all mysteries, you want to make sure you make sure that you understand it in a helpful way. Yeah, it's not like a ghost story, but a proper mystery as to why something so powerful and so widespread. I mean, they traded with perhaps the Mediterranean regions, with Sumeria and what is now Mesopotamia, historically became Mesopotamia and so on. So we don't know why it disappeared, and that's a good lesson to know that something that is so sophisticated, so powerful, and so complex can also be very fragile and very vulnerable. Right? That's really the message to take home. And we often joke that since that we don't really know what led to the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization. What if all those ingredients are still there, and in some way they might just bite us back, and we might meet the fate of the Indus Valley people. Yeah, and we have not been able to decipher their script. We don't know what they spoke and what they talked about. And it's also, again, given what's happening in India today, it's become an extremely political issue. Yeah, some maintaining that this was India's past, and some saying that it was a complete rupture. So to answer that question, I could only say that since we don't really know why it disappeared, we must be very attentive that some of those issues that may have caused that disappearance might still be there. Yeah, and so don't be overconfident of what we currently have achieved. Yeah. Right? That's the only way I can. Yeah.
Hello.
Ah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam, for your talk.
Okay.
I'm Mita. I'm from Yemen. As I lived in Yemen and in India, I saw that country have a rain weather, and so much that caused flood and caused negatively for people. So my question is, in the history and now in the present, there is any solution regarding that? Because especially the country has rainy weather, and that rain causes negatively for people. There are any solution to solve this problem? For example, in India, you have like that. And another question: can we make the best solution from experts and new solution with the new and advanced technology?
Okay. Yeah. Right. Thank you. So I'm to understand your question the following way: that India has the monsoons. Right, we have rains for about 4 or 5 months a year. 5 months a year, yeah, and sometimes these rains are devastating. But if you don't have the monsoons, then you have a drought, which can be even more worrying and alarming. Yeah, and so we always live keeping in mind these two extremes. Either it's going to flood you out, or it's going to dry you out. Right, and so how do we stabilize the water we have? So the technologies are really about storing, about keeping water, enough water when it rains, and holding on to it when you need it. Yeah, that's been the mindset, and there've been histories of tanks, ponds, and different ways of slowing water as it goes to the sea. Yeah, so that's been the historical solution. And then now, of course, large dams holding back the water. But today, what we're seeing is that the monsoon also has begun to become erratic. It is not flowing, it is not raining in historical patterns. You're getting rain sometimes that should have happened in 1 month, it's happening in a day. Yeah, and sometimes there's no rain at all, an extreme event. Yeah, so we are dealing with extremes in historically unprecedented ways. Yeah, and so we have to start a conversation about how much of that can be addressed technologically, how much of that can be addressed through infrastructure, how much of that can be addressed through behavioral change, yeah, how much of that can be expressed through changing expectations about progress and development, yeah. So all that is part of a huge conversation. And again, someone like me would argue democracy is a very important aspect of that solution, not just experts. Yeah, we need more kinds of opinions and voices, and that engineers, that's why I say engineers should be decentered. It's a round table, and everybody's around the table talking about how to move forward. Yeah, right? So that's the, if there's one thing that I'm very committed to is the idea of democracy, yeah? Right? The belief that we should listen to different voices, yeah? And interests. And not an expert-led intervention only.
No?
Yeah.
My name is Abba.
Yeah.
Okay, from this very slide.
Yeah.
And the Hirakuta.
Yeah.
So my question is, after the construction of the dam,
Yeah.
what was the fate of those locals?
Oh, yeah.
Because from my understanding, they used to be agrarian,
Yeah.
and they utilize the floods. And the next question is, have the engineers been able to understand the full scope of the issue? Do you think that they will have had a different approach constructing the dam the way they did?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Good question, actually. Maybe I should have had a slide. Since its inauguration in 1958, the performance of the Hirakud Dam has not been to everyone's satisfaction. In fact, sometimes there's been extreme flooding to save the dam. Because one thing they did not realize is that the reservoir has been filling up with silt, and it's not able to hold the kind of water that it was historically expected to hold. So there have been many occasions where the dam, in order to save the dam, they've released lots of water. Okay? And that's aggravated flooding all the way. Okay, so that's one problem. So today one can't say that Hirakud is a successful intervention, because it is not. It's not been able to stop lots of big floods. On the other hand, because it has not, it has held back silt, the deltaic plain is impoverished now. It is sinking lower than the sea. That's another big challenge for Orissa. Yeah, that it's not, the land is not being built; it's being held back in the reservoir, and the life of the dam now is coming to its close. I mean, at some point they'll have to just keep the gates open. It can no longer work as a dam, yeah, because it's just filled up. Secondly, to your question, would the engineers, when they realized that, have approached it differently? One can't really say. There was a mood in the 1930s and 40s across the world, not only in India, that you could, this was the Tennessee Valley Association projects of dams. There was this mood that your entry into modernity was through controlling big rivers. So there was dam building phase across the world from the 1940s and 50s, and Hirakud got caught up in that thinking. Yeah, but interestingly enough, there were many engineers who also resisted the idea. And in India, very strange situation. The British were not keen on this dam, but the Americans were providing the intellectual and engineering support. And so you get the British actually writing against this dam. It's a very interesting twist, which my book does deal with. Yeah, some of the best critiques of the Hirakud actually come from British engineers who are very convinced that this is not going to work. So, life is strange, yeah, full of twists and turns. Oh, wow.
Hello?
Yeah.
My name is Brian.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for your lecture. So I have a question, especially considering your challenge towards a more modernist approach to water challenges.
Yeah.
And how we should take a mixed blend in terms of thinking towards the challenges of the future.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do we, as engineers working for the world, solve these challenges? How do we solve being productive in coming up with solutions?
Yeah.
The challenges we're dealing with now might be completely different.
Right.
maybe scientific idea that the current situation we're in now is more like a warm global period that will change in the next 10 years or 20, 30 years. So how do we implement solutions now that will help people that might affect future civilizations?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. I'm going to just repeat it because it's really comes to the heart of what I'm trying to say. So, how do the engineers deal with the new realities that are coming up, right? And that is why I'm trying to urge you to think of your task as problem constituting and not only problem solving. And problem constituting is also something that you can push those boundaries by talking to historians and social scientists. I'm also, okay, this might sound a bit too political and too strategic, but you know, everywhere in the world they're trying to cut money in the humanities. And they're trying to shift that amount of money to the sciences and to the engineering. Yeah? And people like me are arguing, no, you can't really do your engineering without us. So it would be great if you as engineers actually are aware of our strengths and made us aware of your strengths. Yeah? We should be in conversation. And don't allow your governments to cut humanities budgets and social science budgets. Yeah? And don't tell your children that literature means nothing and that, you know, it's just a little bit of language on the side. Yeah? There are many governments in the world today that do not want to encourage the social sciences because it challenges power in a very, very critical and defining way. And they feel that all problems can be technicalized. They need not be thought through philosophically and politically. Yeah? Okay? So part of my effort, and I was telling Amit as well, Amit Anshu, that part of my effort is to basically say, don't cut the budgets of humanities and history. It's very important. You will miss us when we are gone. Yeah? Okay? Right? And that universities should have a more holistic approach towards the crisis of climate change. Yeah? And that it's that problem constituting and problem solving you must walk on 2 feet, so to speak. Yeah? So please don't allow your governments to dismiss the social sciences and humanities. And of course, there are bad historians, there are rotten sociologists, there are useless political scientists. I'm not saying that we're all really fantastic people, yeah. But you know, it's a bucket of apples. Some are good and some are bad, yeah. But you need them, yeah. I don't know if I just conveyed myself very bluntly. Sorry. Yeah, give us more money. That's what it means. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, sure. Wow. I'm not used to this. You know, in my class in Kyoto, it's always in the afternoon after lunch. So there is a very low rate of people who survive the lecture. They're always sleeping. Yeah. So thank you. It must be morning. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. But yeah, but maybe a little louder. Yeah.
Sorry, can you put the mic?
The mic is not on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We have seen a lot of examples where we have used history as an example of good practices from the past. But there are examples where history has been a source of disagreements and conflicts, right?
Yeah.
So my best example, because I'm from Ethiopia, my best example could be the disagreements on the Nile River. So there are treaties in the colonial eras and everything. So how can we use history, because this has been a source of disagreement and a source of conflicts, how can we use history as a source of agreement, right? How can we solve disagreements in the past or disagreements during historical periods? I know this is a very debatable topic, and there is a lot of disagreement and a lot of politics involved in it. I just wanted to hear an opinion from a historian perspective.
Right. You know, that's a very, very important question because this is the problem that the futurists had. They said, let's just ignore history and just move forward. Yeah, but as you can see with the Nile issue, and it's a very intense one and a very dangerous one right now. Yeah, it's everybody fears that it's going to escalate at some point. Yeah, the thing is, it's not how we use history or whether we use history as lessons or we are informed by history, because obviously it will produce very conflicting different accounts and stories. Yeah, but the understanding that you cannot ignore it, that it is going to be there in the room, and you're going to say things like, just because our parents had a fight with your parents, it doesn't mean that we the children are hostage to that. Yeah, but it's there. They did, yes. And how do we move forward is also something that's very important. Yeah, okay. Well, historically the Nile region, I mean, not that I'm very informed about it. The thing is, large parts of that region were dominated by forest communities, nomads, pastoralists, yeah, who had a very different use of that water. But Egypt moved forward with its civilizational complexity, yeah, right. But Ethiopia now wants to catch up and move forward. I would not use the word catch up, but wants to reinvent itself differently than what its history is, yeah. And so there must be a place for that accommodation, yeah. There must be an understanding of how you should move forward without creating a situation of permanent crisis, yeah. That's the way I'd imagine. And I don't think it's easy. And I don't think it's something that people such as myself can sort, yeah. But you would want to say we need peace and we need to move forward and we need to be in a situation where both benefit, yeah. And how to exactly create that language and those terms for that understanding. I don't know, what I'm saying. Yeah, but the point you made is well taken, that history will always produce you many kinds of narratives. So what kinds of narratives can help you move forward is equally important. Yeah, but you can't ignore it. That's also true.
Are there any other questions?
So in that case, and Rohan, you've been talking for almost one and a half.
No, that's okay.
1.5 hours. So thank you so much for your patience. And it's been, as we'll all agree, a very interesting discussion, and there were so many questions, so thank you for that. And I think there'll be a lot for you to kind of consume and think through based on this lecture, and we cannot thank you, Rohan, for giving that fodder for thought. And it's been a great session. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll get back to this room. So please reinvigorate yourselves with as much coffee and other stimulants as you can, because the next session, I promise you, is going to be equally exciting. And so we look forward to that. So thank you, and we have a round of applause for Rohan for a wonderful lecture. Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Okay, we just decided that we'll give a longish break, so go for around say 20-25 minutes, and please be back after that. So 20 minutes is, yeah, I'm keeping an eye on time.